Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I'm your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I have interviewed a number of amazing people and simply had a conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@changehappen.co.uk. That's S-E-E, changehappen.co.uk. You can catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 70 with the title, A New Diversity. And I have the absolute honor and privilege to welcome Neerja Singh. Neerja describes herself as someone who brings home to people the crying need for generational benevolence, and who opens their eyes to the threat generational dissidence can hold to our collective mental and emotional health. When I asked Neerja to describe her superpower, she said, a deep desire to leave behind her a generation that is more potent, progressive, and productive than her generation. Hello, Neerja. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. It's lovely to be here. And it's like a dream. We were in Dublin just 20 days ago attending the Global Speakers Summit. And here we are across the oceans doing a podcast on my favorite subject, generational diversity. Thank you, Joe, for this opportunity.
Absolute pleasure. And it was absolutely wonderful to meet you in person, as you say, a couple of weeks ago. So, Neerja, what do you mean by a new diversity?
We talk about diversity in terms of gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic differences, but generational is a diversity that is just beginning to emerge. I do believe that it presents very unique challenges. The interesting thing about generational diversity, Joe, is that each and every one of us is going to be experiencing this because we are going to enter different age groups. So everyone is going to be affected by it. There are very special circumstances today that make this a very crucial, critical diversity, which ought to be studied very, very seriously. Yes, Joe.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that's quite insightful. We are all going to experience generational diversity because we will all, whilst we may stay within our own generational bound, that bound relatively changes as time progresses and new generations come along, new cultures come along, new ways of thinking come along. And we almost like decay into the past, if you like, for want of a better way of putting it. So yeah, it's something I'd never really considered, that we all experience it. And it's the saying, isn't it? We're all in the same storm but different boats. So we're all in the same generational momentum, but we're experiencing it in a slightly different way.
In fact, Joe, there are micro generations today because things are changing so fast, and it is the technology around us that has given generations that are coming up now a form of autonomy and agency that perhaps you and I have never seen before. So there are very fundamental social systems, dynamics that are under threat today. For instance, the collapse of authority. You might have a young person feel today that they don't need their grandparents anymore. They don't need their parents anymore. They have such power at their fingertips thanks to the internet. So these are phenomena that need to be very, very closely studied, researched, and spoken about so that everybody at places of work, at home, in public spaces is aware of what is at play and how can we be more productive and happier. Who doesn't want a happy workforce that over delivers, right?
Of
And
course,
here is where generational
discretionary
diversity
effort.
comes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We want discretionary effort. We want that sense of belonging. We want that empowerment. We want that those connections within our workplace, and those can be tricky when you've got, as you say, multiple generations, multiple viewpoints, multiple biases we may develop in a perspectives in our own life because we've been brought up cross-generationally. Our viewpoints are often anchored to the situation we were when we grew, when we developed or grew or experienced something.
Absolutely. And we need to remind ourselves, Joe, that this generation gap is unique, never ever unprecedented. And the reason is that this is not about style or music or sexual experimentation or consumption. This gap is about language. There are battles over inclusivity, about diversity and power structures. And just to make a representative case, I usually use two terms, boomer and zoomer. They're not entirely accurate, but for the sake of argument, let's say a boomer wanted a paycheck once, a zoomer looks for purpose. For one, it is satisfaction. For the other, it is development. One wants a boss or worked with a boss, and the other looks for a coach today. For one, it is a job. For the other, there's a life. For one, there's a job in a government, military, public sector. And for the other, it's their own business. So there are very, very fundamental differences that we need to be aware of because at work, they will present themselves in different expectations, in
That's
different
interesting. Yeah.
definitions of, yes, different definitions of, let's say, excellence or ethics or work culture, expectations. That's why
Yeah.
this new
So,
generational diversity needs to be studied.
yeah. I mean, the reason I think that's insightful and opening my eyes is because I live and work and I've been spent most of my life in the UK, the south of England, and you are based in Hyderabad in India. Presumably, you've spent a good proportion of your life in a very similar area to that. So, what you're saying there, from the other side of the world across several continents, is very similar to my perception of my reality. So, this is a cross-generational, cross-cultural experience as well. So, we're not saying a boomer from your continent has vastly different expectations than a boomer from my continent. Yes, we have different nuances because of our cultures, but fundamentally the desires and needs, because we're living in a global world now, a connected global world, we're homogenizing around common thinking and common experiences, aren't we?
So today, each generation is like a culture. So that is one, with their own language, with their own visuals, with their own values that they internalize and they practice. So that is one. Second, in India, there has, the social revolution has happened so fast. Currently, several revolutions are going on in my country. There's the industrial, there is your political. Most important is the social revolution afoot around me. And until the 2013, I was quite blissfully unaware of this generational gap and how fundamental it could be. There were two incidents, Joe, that happened in 2013. My husband is a fighter pilot, and we were posted at an Air Force base where a MiG-21 crashed, and the 25-year-old pilot lost his life. Of course, the plane went down too. Now, crashes have happened before. What was disturbing about this was the cause. The cause was sleep deprivation, social media addiction. This young pilot was up at night chatting up with his girlfriend. Now, this is something that did not happen in 1986 when I got married. My husband was flying those days and he told me very firmly that his sleep is very important. That is one. Imagine the extent of the loss. And the second was in 2013, my daughter, she was 23 then, she went into depression completely out of the blue for us. Unexpected. We considered ourselves fairly progressive parents. We read up on the new ideas around and we thought we were on top of it. But here we were faced with this very desolate, bleak, and frightening experience with our older one who ticked all the check boxes. And here she was, with this very dark space. That made me sit up and start looking around what is going on. And that's how my engagement with generational diversity started. And the more I studied, the more I realized that because of the hyperconnectedness today, Joe, whether it's UK, whether it's South Africa, whether it's India, there is a mass mind, almost a colonization of minds, young minds, I say, colonization of young minds that is happening around us. So it's hard to say what is influencing the young people, the next generation, all across the world. It is mostly similar information that they're getting from the internet, unfiltered information.
Yeah, as I was talking now, I was thinking that my generation, if you like, were always. I think you would class me as a Gen X, born in the
Yes.
mid-60s. So I'm just a Gen X, not a boomer. So I spent most of my life in a technical IT connected. So I was always at the leading edge of technology, creating knowledge, training other people to use it. And also I spent a lot of my formative years, my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, traveling around the world, for work and also for pleasure, going to world meetings of in networking and home hosting in people's homes and living with people in their countries. So I've always considered myself to be not a true Gen Xer in terms of technology or connectedness, because I feel like I've got those aspirations. And I think one thing that's taught me in the last 2 years with COVID is that I was already ready for a technical global perspective and not seeing things very parochial and very locale based, but more what can we do globally. So it's what I think what I'm trying to say is that we've got to be careful we don't create stereotypes or label people as being of a certain age. Some of it is mindset, but I also appreciate there is some definite generational anchoring of my age that means that I do think in different ways than someone who's maybe a Zoomer, as you called them. Yeah,
That's true. The only thing today is that what's happening is, again, the rate of change. For instance, today the average age of founders of unicorns would be, let's say, 31, and the age of the CEOs would be 41, perhaps. And many of them have little guidance or experience to run companies that are scaling very quickly. Like they say, there's as yet no microwave in the market for leadership skills. So one is awareness, a global viewpoint, like you developed because of your traveling, which is great. The other is what is going on in workplaces, in companies, in businesses. So power is moving younger and younger, and the older people, many of them begin to feel irrelevant, Joe, today. And that's a paradox because longevity gets better and better. People are living longer, they stay healthy, they're quite aware of medical issues, and they would like to stay relevant. And however, they begin to feel out of place. So the thing in being aware of generational diversity is to examine and apply ways in which we can include the different generations and reap the benefits of their very unique strengths. Because let's say for the younger unicorns, there's no microwave as yet in the market for leadership skills. So you can't instantly have them learn how to lead. So while the older generation may lack in what you call digital intelligence, maybe DQ, but they can make up in accumulated EQ. So these are ways to get together various diverse generations, age diversity, and make the most of their strengths. But for that, managers and the leaders have to be up to speed with how differently these various generations think and what their life paradigms are. Finally, that is important.
Yeah, and so my generation, without casting any dispersions on your age, but maybe our both senior generation here, is that we grew up in a world where leadership wasn't nurtured with EQ or even CQ or DQ. DQ wouldn't exist at that time. So we grew up in a very much more command and control, hierarchical, not necessarily dictatorial leadership, certainly authoritative like leadership. Whereas the leadership styles that work better today are more collaborative, they're more transformational, they're more bottom up. And some maybe leaders who are 40, 45, 50 plus haven't necessarily grown their career with that mindset. And that's a real tough retraining for many leaders to get their head around, isn't it?
Absolutely. Certainly. It is. And it requires an entire process of reframing their assumptions and being willing to listen, being willing to speak only, like they say, 25% of what they're thinking. And yes, it is. And but it has to be done because today, Joe, we need to appreciate that. For instance, I call myself a Gen Bridger, but what is bridging today? What does it imply? Well, bridging today is start where the next generation is, not from where you are. So it's not a bridge from me to the next generation. No, you are helping them build a bridge from where they are and where they want to go. That is Gen bridging here in this case. So that level of empathy, that willingness to acknowledge that things have changed so drastically, Joe, that today, for example, let's say this is something beautiful I read. It says that our young may need us for the timeless values and virtues that make civilization work, but we may need them to envision where the future is taking us. They are the ones who are going to envision where the future is taking us. So it's true, what you're describing was a very different form of leadership, authoritative, prescriptive. That is not working anymore because, in many cases, a millennial or a Gen Z might turn around and say, well, I really don't need them. All my questions are being answered by Alexa, by Siri, by Google. What do I need the older generation for? And I'm empowered by social media. If I have an idea, I don't have to wait to give a proposal, have it approved, and then implement it. I can just put a note on Facebook. I can put it out on LinkedIn, and I can connect with people, mobilize funds, and just get this done. So that agency and the autonomy that technology has given the next generation has really tipped the balance. So we are in a new world, Joe.
So, I mean, if we just think about cultural intelligence as a concept, the first element of that, as I'm sure you're aware, is that drive to recognize that you need to find out more in our conversation here about different generations. But we have to realize that not everybody has that drive, has that aspiration. Many people are locked into their own way of working. We get to a certain point in our lives where we've been through so much change over our years. We want to just say, actually, can we just carry on as I am now? I want to stick and carry on. So for many, now introducing this new concept of leadership, the way the world works, we're now hyper-connected, we're more in touch with different generations. A lot of people who haven't perceived this need to create knowledge and drive around different generations are probably really struggling. How do they become aware, and how do they embark on this journey?
So they become aware firstly, this podcast that we're doing, this is one way, and this is a step closer. This generational diversity and the need for generational, I call it benevolence, which is not a given anymore. If generations begin to feel that they don't need each other to survive, Joe, and that they can they can get on with their lives and they live very polarized, in niches, in very uh, narrow echo chambers. The same age group will live with the same age group, interact with the same age group. So if you're not interacting with your grandparent, let's say if that's not happening, then this is a red flag. This is a red flag for humans, I feel. So that's one. And second is that when they start losing they have trouble with retaining employees, if they have trouble with estrangement from their children, when there is a sudden crisis like I faced a crisis in 2013. That was out of the blue. I should have been sensitive enough and informed enough and prepared enough to anticipate it. I didn't. But we can't afford that. That proved to be extremely expensive, unaffordable. So when people start to be faced with these difficult situations in their lives, that's one way of waking up. The other is people who are in a position of authority and power. They do something they step up to this challenge. Firstly, they recognize this and then they start addressing it. For example, at the workplace, a comprehensive hiring strategy, for instance. There is a lot of lip service, Joe, that is paid to diversity, but how many companies have processes in place, diversity hiring processes in place? So if generational diversity is acknowledged, companies can do this, the bosses and the leaders can be doing this. They can also make sure that other leaders understand the benefits of an age diverse workforce and basically strategize better. You address employee onboarding, team integration. Then you also build awareness of potential issues to ensure that communication problems that arise from an age diverse workforce are addressed, and keep talking to the wider team about age diversity. Normalize it, make it imperative for people to accept it and to just anticipate it, in fact. And so these are some ways of ensuring that people become aware of generational diversity and they begin to recognize the benefits that they stand to gain. So, a happier life, a healthier life, a better communication, a more wholesome social system, and our collective emotional and mental health progresses and flourishes, Joe.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying completely, and I think that I suppose as someone in my age of life, my late 50s, is that the onus is now on me to build that bridge, as you talked about, building the
Yes,
bridge at generations,
yes.
because the younger generations are probably looking down, not up. So we have to disconnect and we have to take responsibility as the older generation to build that bridge rather than expecting the younger ones to meet us halfway. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And to prove my point, let me talk a little about what is coming up next. We are talking about generational Z, Gen Z. There is an alpha generation that's coming up next. So children who were born, let's say in 2015, 2016, uh, there is debate. Some people want to say that the alpha generation came in at 2010, but 2016, let's say, because a lot of very pivotal points, pivotal events happened in 2016. So this generation, there is a WhatsApp message that was doing the round some time ago. You may have seen it. There's this picture of an alpha, a toddler, trying to the child is using the index finger on a book and trying to move it and treat it as a smartphone or a smart screen. The child hasn't seen a traditional book. The child doesn't know that this this thing has to be opened so that they can look at the pictures. A very, very immersed generation, completely most immersed generation in technology. That is one. And also remember that every generation is a product of the world that they grow up in. And this particular generation is very interesting because for them, pandemic, mental health of their parents, 33% of their lives has been affected by watching a particular brand of adulting, which includes a very polarized world, a very, well, uncivil world, yelling going on, neighbors not being neighborly. I'm talking about even the political leaders we've had during that period. So they've seen all these events and they are there are certain things which are predicted about this generation. It's also said it's too early to say too much because that kind of research isn't very accurate when you're just, basing it on very, very young people. However, this generation will be the most educated. I mentioned they'll be most tech immersed. They'll also be most materially endowed generation, most impatient generation, the generation that gets rude with Alexa, screams at Alexa. Also, very self-directed, most self-directed generation ever. And so they are the generation that'll be used to giving directions to technology as well as receiving directions from technology. And interestingly, this generation is going to experience more virtual relationships perhaps than human ones because they are working with robotics, not electronics. There's a difference there. And they unfortunately, they're also a generation that's going to be probably spending their childhood without both of their biological parents. So the three A's that will probably, again, probably because this generation is very young, they say that are going to define this generation is the level of autonomy is one, high level of autonomy because they're working with a tablet in preschool, anxiety in preschool, because they are exposed to the war in Ukraine. You can't keep it from them. They are exposed to, uh, there's a term, the extinction of childlikeness and extension of childishness, which may happen with this generation, because in the later years you want to compensate for what you lost when you were younger. And finally, Joe, agency. They have this sense of agency. They don't feel the need to wait to put their ideas into practice. You have YouTube that can teach them quickly how to do what they want to do. And then there is social media to get what they want. So today, Joe, what is being spoken of is that parents and bosses have to stop being guards, but begin to be guides, from guards to guides. So these are the kind of reorientation of our perspectives and our approaches when managing, when taking care of the younger generation. Uh, this is what we need to be aware. We need to anticipate. We need to anticipate what is coming at us and not assume that this is how it's going to be. Do not assume, Joe.
I think as you were talking there, I'm finally understanding about building this bridge. I'm finally understanding it because what I am doing is I've recognized some of the things you just mentioned. I can't function without my Alexa. It turns the lights on, it turns the telly on, I change the color of the lights. If I could control even more of my home with it, I would just be shouting at it. And you're right, I get really, really frustrated if it doesn't do what I say. So I'm acting already
Yes.
petulant towards my digital assistants. So I'm now having to reach into the modern technology and bring that to me, as you say. So I'm building that bridge upwards to me. And YouTube and TikTok, I'm now absorbing the knowledge through these channels, which is the native for, as you say, Gen Alpha or even a Gen Z. I'm being driven by technology. My watch beeps at me and tells me to stand up. My watch tells me it's raining. My watch tells me it's going to stop raining. So
Yes.
I'm now taking instructions from my AI or my digital assistant, as well as giving instructions. So everything you're saying now, I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I've bridged into this world and I've had to build that into my life. It helps that I'm a bit tech savvy. It helps that I'm a bit intrigued by all this. It would definitely scare people who are maybe not in that environment, who are maybe detached from technology, where that wasn't part of their business. So yeah, and we Facebook, the metaverse, and you said there we're living our lives in this digital world with digital relationships, digital everything, and even deep fake technology, AI.
Absolutely.
We don't need actors anymore. We don't need voice. I was actually thinking the other day, if I wanted to build a show reel or a video training course, I could create a diverse set of actors with AI and develop an entire course and give it a script with different accents, different languages. In time, maybe not quite today, but by this time in 3 or 4 years' time, I could build all of that for my computer and build a complete film as an amateur, let alone what Hollywood, let alone what everybody else can do. And we've already seen, is it Carrie Fisher played Princess Leia in Star Wars? She was avatared, wasn't she? In that last episode, in that last one, she'd already died. And we've seen the aging going on. We've seen all these kind of things.
And holograms for speakers and
Yeah.
leaders, holograms where you don't need to be present physically to be able to do
Mm.
that. There's a famous story in India, because in India, in some of the villages during elections, one of the political leaders, in fact, our prime minister, there was a hologram, and the reporter narrated how the villagers tentatively stepped up, then pulled back the curtain to see where has he disappeared. They couldn't believe that he was not there. It caused them such amazement and surprise. So yes, technology is it is going to change. It's already changed, and with
Yeah.
AI already is so integral a part of our
Yeah.
lives.
I see
So
it already with my parents, who are late 80s, early 90s. And they are used to having a certain level of trust with authority. They see authority as being the police, the bank, government. So they take without question instruction and order from people in authority. And that manifests itself as being targets for scamming, for fraud, because it's very easy to create that power perception of somebody in authority to instruct my parents how to behave. And they just go, okay, you're in authority. I will listen. I will do as you tell me. My generation and younger are more savvy. I start with everything is likely to be a scam until I can prove otherwise, especially if it has money or they want something. So I'm always a kind of, come on, prove it to me, prove it to me. Okay, I now trust you. So what I'm seeing here is when we're talking about deep fake, we talk about AI, we talk about all the things we just talked about there. The challenge there is the emerging generation are going to have to build trust into the interfaces here that I, as a Gen Xer, won't understand and I'll be vulnerable to. So they will deep distrust video media, television, imagery, because they will know about deep faking inherently, because they'll be living in that metaverse. Whereas I won't. I won't mistrust that yet. I have to build that bridge again and learn that modern concept of and build a new trust with technology. And that's, I can see why my parents are worried about their. I'm now thinking,
it's true.
how do I
That's
live in this world?
no, that's true, because there is a trust deficit as it is, Joe. And again, I have to say this, that wisdom is, and everybody says don't stereotype a generation, but the fact is that there are stereotypical character. I mean, there are, well, stereotypical. There are characteristics that we can use to address wellness programs for generations. For instance, you just mentioned trust in authority. For a boomer, for me, a doctor's word is the Bible. He knows what he's doing. He's the expert. I'm not going to question the doctor. But for the next generation, for the younger generation, what they're going to do is first go online and do all their surfing. And that's where the anxiety also begins. And what they need, I realized that with my daughter who went into depression and who had to see doctors and psychiatrists, she she needed a partner. She didn't need an authority figure. And a wellness program for her would have been ideally something that included not just nutrition, but financial planning, mental health, all of this, a middle ground, so to say.
Hmm.
So the needs of every generation is very different. You look for somebody who can partner with you in your
Yes.
recovery, but
Yeah.
not an uncle psychiatrist who's telling you put on your shoes and go and run, or you know uh, not not is not compassionate enough with behavioral health, let's say, challenges. So that's where if they were more aware, if they were more open and compassionate and judged a little less and were aware of the circumstances of the next generation and their struggles, then we could help them stay potent, and we could prevent lives from spiraling out of control. That is what I feel very strongly about it. That's why we need to understand what is happening and what are the new realities that we are dealing with. We need to be proactive, step up and find out, anticipate. I write a column, Joe. I write a column. I want to mention that, and I call it a step ahead. So, parents, teachers, bosses, be aware of the language of the next generation, of what their belief systems are, of what they value, of where they are going, where they want to be, and then be there, be the ally, be an asset, be relevant, be relevant. Because our mandate, I believe every generation's mandate is to leave behind one that's more potent, progressive, and productive.
So
That's
you mentioned
important.
you used the term
Mm.
microgenerations earlier, and I'm seeing in my own reality that the pace of change is far more rapid. A change. Go back 150 years, society fundamentally didn't change that quickly. We went from many hundreds of years using horses to suddenly
Yes.
steam, to suddenly from steam to petrol, from petrol to and that pace of change. We're going to the moon with crossing planets. So I can only see the pace of change rapidly increasing, especially when we're talking about climate change, planetary care, sustainability, removing plastics, which is what the younger generation really deeply care about. They care about their future, their planet. They've owned it. It's their planet now, not ours.
Okay, they care. They're telling us, Joe, they're saying they're not sure they're going to die or they're going to have the luxury of dying of old age.
Yeah.
That's what it's come to. They're
Mm.
not sure of that. They could die of climate, some other catastrophe, which is which is which is poignant, which is not right, which is unacceptable, which is not the way of nature, which is not the law of nature. And therefore, again, for workplaces, for leaders, for managers of the new generations, they need to really be clear on what leadership. Let's say we were talking about the alpha generation, which is in time going to be joining the workforce. What is the leadership of alpha going to look like? What are the skills that leaders will have to focus on with this generation? For instance, and not just alpha, even Gen Z, the generation that is right now, 1995, born 1995, 1996 onwards, their emotional development, Joe. So focus on development of their emotional self, their emotional, their emotional management, the self-management. That is what we are seeing around us with young people. The self-management is somewhere going awry. Uh, One more thing you see, and I saw that with my children. My children are millennials. This is repressed anger, and sometimes it's that anger which is manifesting, which is presenting as depression. There's a lot of anger about the state of things around them, about what they see as, what they perceive as injustice, how the world has been messed up. Greta Thunberg is an example, a young girl standing in the European Parliament and saying, I'm Greta Thunberg, I'm 16, I'm from Sweden, and then I want you to panic. So there is this sense of urgency that things are spiraling out of control. Which again I talk about this show, which is why we have the witches renaissance also around us. When a generation feels that they are not in control of things, that things are slipping out of their hands, that is when they turn to, let's say, potions or the lunar festival, and or I don't know if you're aware or you're kind of about the witches renaissance, but I was really struck by this new development of how the young people are trying to soothe themselves, literally. So the new leadership, if they were aware, they would help them with these interpersonal skills and how to manage conflict, and help them cultivate deeper relationships. That's huge today. I mean, a lot of young people are not able to sustain relationships, and of course, promoting physical activity, outdoor exercise. So these are some of the things that a leader of the next generation needs to be focused on.
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, when I was 16, I wasn't hyper aware of every little thing going on, because you weren't. You got the news once a day if you were lucky. As a teenager, you probably didn't even watch it or care about it. So I think because younger people are hyper connected with devices, they're getting notifications, they're seeing the news pop up, they're seeing the Facebook, it's on everywhere, on TikTok, wherever they're going. So they can't ignore it. So that, as you say, they're becoming hyper aware, that they're being, I would say, overwhelmed with knowledge and data, where if you're 16 years old, 4 years is a quarter of your life. If you're our generation, it's 5% of your life. So what is a big deal when it's a quarter of your life, it becomes less of a big deal when it's such a small percentage of your life. And obviously time goes quicker when you're older, because you perceive it, because you've done it all before, and it's in a different frame. So yeah, I can understand why the younger generation are feeling this anxiety, this overwhelm. When we talk about well-being, it's mental well-being is more hyper intense than physical well-being in many cases. And as you said, the point about the doctor is, I want my doctor to know how I feel, not where it hurts. I want them to know how I'm feeling about something. And I guess when we talk about the next generation of medical intervention here, it's about treating my mind as much as treating my symptoms, and making me feel as though I trust you. And I've done this. I've walked into my doctor with Google on my phone saying, I've got
Yes.
cholecystitis and my gallbladder needs to come out. And they went, don't be so hasty. We need to do ultrasounds and MRI scans. I said, do what you need to do. Then 3 weeks later, they admitted me to hospital and took my gallbladder out. But I self-diagnosed this through gallstone support groups online, through Facebook channels, through all this, and people's lived experience. I mean, that's exactly what happens to me. That's exactly what happened. So when they started telling me that I had indigestion, I said, no, it's not indigestion. You're not. These aren't the droids you're looking for. This is completely different. So, but yeah, I mean, again, I've built that bridge, if you like, into that technology zone. So I feel quite comfortable doing that. But again, not everybody is, and it's a real challenge in business, isn't it? Because as I always say, is you can't be inclusive by excluding people, and we've got to recognize that some people who are midlife, later life, their role has changed immensely because the rapid change of pace of technology, etc. Our organization is doing enough to help them build that bridge that we talked about, help them retrain, help them to become more relevant, or we just assuming that everybody has to pick it up for themselves. And I think that's the challenge the business have, is seeing the worth of people in their 50s, in their 60s, and in their 70s. Because the reality is most of us won't be able to retire because pension funds are depleted. There's more people drawing than have ever contributed. Our health is actually, our average lifespan is actually going down again now, isn't it? We're becoming, I think for the first time in many generations, but we're dying earlier now due to pollution and mental health and well-being and other factors. So there's a lot of challenges for the older generation to try and adapt to the younger one. And I suppose it's the prerogative of youth not to care, to think about yourselves rather than what went before you.
Yes, and that's happening. You mentioned anxiety. I know that for some young people, just the buzz of the phone causes their hearts to miss a beat. It's like, oh God, oh, what's coming now? What's the message now? So that's happening with young people. And you talked about the doctors. Joe, my daughter, my 31-year-old, would also talk about the big pharma frauds. So my personal is political for many of this generation. They are social justice warriors, and they take sides. And she would say that I don't want to eat medicines because these, pharmacy companies are lying, or it's very commercial and profit oriented, and all kinds of bigger issues would sometimes influence her decisions. And our attitude would be, okay, the doctor has told you to eat this medicine, just take the medicine, this is for your good. But there were so many other underlying concerns that would influence their choices. So you talked about the onus, whether the onus should be with the younger one. Did you say that, Ucho? I do believe that the onus actually.
Yeah. Who has to take responsibility? Do we need the younger generation to meet us halfway, or at least help us with our bridge?
Well, that will not happen just by wanting it to happen. That's going to happen when we build a sense, give them a sense of connection where they feel invested enough. Like I said, the reality today is that it's easy for the younger generation to just, there's a cancel culture, just shut out people, just shut out ideas that don't that they don't get or that don't help them in any way. It's very easy for them to do that, and they're doing it. I know young people who are moving away from their biological families. They're charting, they're writing down their living wills in which their friends are involved. So they're creating families outside of what was once the real family. You always said this is the real family, it's the biological family. Well, that family, it no longer holds that kind of sanctity that it once held. Then, like young people who are not marrying today, Joe, the young people, if they're marrying, they don't want children. They don't want to have children. There are countries where the rate of replacement and how that is going. They're not enough to, the population is going down. Bad for economy, bad for society. It's not a good sign for survival of the human species, I'm saying. So when you say that the onus ought to be on the younger one, well, that's going to happen only if they feel heard, seen, and if they feel that there is a genuine desire from the older generation to help them. I think they have a very keen bullshit meter, and they pick on that very fast. So none of that works anymore. I've done that with my children, and I've been told how I'm being passive aggressive in my communication and all of that. They're very quick. They're very sensitive to all of this. I'll go so far as to say that you feel as though they can read your mind. So be very, very, very straight. Cut all the nonsense. Cut all the sharp. Like, get to the core. And then if then they begin to trust you. That you're coming from a place of integrity. and a clean desire to help, that is when they might meet you halfway. That's what my experience has been, Joe.
And that's going to create a challenge in the business world, isn't it? Because where the leaders and the senior people in the organizations are disconnected from the younger generation, and the younger
Yes.
generation is not taking any part of responsibility to build that bridge. It's all on the onus of the leaders, and if they don't recognize that they need to build this bridge, their disconnect is going to grow wider, and then there's going to be poor communications, and we're not going to be collaborative, and all the good things about the modern way of working won't be realized in some organizations where that bridge can't be built.
Certainly. That's why leaders and business bosses have to stop operating from a place of fear and a place of this fight or flee, just shutting the cabin and because you are not able to communicate with them. That I don't think that's working with a lot of people, and this is a time to make an attempt. Make an attempt, inform yourself, get into the trenches with them, and try and understand. Because remember, there are micro generations today, and more age diversity coming in, and that many different cultures. If you accept that each generation is functioning like a culture in itself, and that's that big a headache and exhaustion of communicating with this vast variety of uh, well generations. So which is why I say that this is a subject that has to be taken up, and this subject that has to be studied and addressed and talked about. You can't just presume that communication is happening on its own, and um, you are communicating and it's working. It's not working. It's not working. There are very different ways of, for instance, authority. Some of them, they just don't accept authority. They don't understand it. So what are you going to do with a workforce that might tell you, if you are the boss and they get a phone call and they pick up the call in your presence and go so far as to tell you to go out of the room so that they can have some privacy with their call? It's a new template. But if you made an effort to understand where all that is coming from, where their behavior is coming from, then we can have that productive and happy workplace. Therefore, very important to study this new diversity, be aware of it, be conscious, and get into it.
Because now we have 5 generations, don't we? There's 5 generations. That bridge has multiple spans to get down to the bottom, doesn't it?
So, Joe, they say that never before in mankind's history have so many generations been alive because of longevity, and that many generations and that many years apart. Earlier, it was closer. So there were 3 generations. There would be yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Today is different. So this is an unprecedented age diversity that we see around us.
And the message you're saying here is it's cross-cultural as well, cross-continent, cross-time zone, cross-cultural. And we can't look at it in isolation and be siloed into our own thinking, because the world is global. We're connected globally. Things that happen on one side of the world have impact on the other. We saw what happened with the UK economy when we tried to play with our interest rates and things like that here. The markets around the world kicked in. What's going on in Ukraine with Russia is affecting the global markets. Everybody's interconnected. And you add into that, as you said, this generational diversity that is inherent, and it's so innate into our lives that all we can do really is learn to adapt around it, or be aware, certainly be aware of it.
You have to be aware of it. You have to treat them not as though they're all the same. They're not. And you have to treat them because each person is different with their own needs, their own expectations. And again, the need to build a bridge and not be a wall, Joe. We talked about creating a bridge. And finally, I would say one particular phenomena that could and is working beautifully, where people have managed to pull it off, is reverse mentoring. Reverse mentoring, if practiced the right way, can give phenomenal results, and probably is the answer to all these generational issues or dissonance that we face around us at work and at home. So
And the important
reverse
thing about,
mentoring
yeah,
would be the secret to every generation adding and gaining value from each other, from each other's strengths.
whilst avoiding the pitfall of the reverse mentoring being a one-way street where the more senior person does all the drawing of the knowledge without giving back. So that sometimes we've got to be careful here. Reverse mentoring has got to be truly symbiotic, a win-win.
Yes,
Both parties have to get some inspiration and some motivation out of it. And I think that goes for also when we think of other elements of diversity, being able to understand different lived experience, different life challenges, different needs. That's an excellent one. I completely agree with you. Reverse mentoring should be baked into many leadership development programs, and and we can learn.
absolutely. It's an art. It's an art and science of reverse mentoring, an entire subject.
Brilliant. Neerja, we've been chatting away for just over an hour now. Time is flying. We've probably both aged a generation since we've been talking. Gen Charlie is already on the way somewhere. Absolutely amazing. So I'm sure our listeners would love to be able to get a hold of you. I believe you've got a book, a website, LinkedIn profile. Tell us about your book. Tell us about how we can get hold of you.
Yes, I've written 4 books, Joe, on generational issues, and I have an author's page on Amazon. I have a website, neerjasingh.com, with a URL, HTTPS, all of that, neerjasingh.com. And my LinkedIn is also linkedin.com and Neerja Singh, Neerja-Singh. And Twitter is _Neerja Singh.
Fantastic. And just for people who are listening, it's Neerja is Neerja, and Singh
right.
is Singh. So if anyone who needs some help with spelling that, but you also find all those details on the show notes on this podcast as well. Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you in person a few weeks ago and also catch up with you now, and I appreciate your time.
Absolutely, Joe.
So a huge thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in, for getting to the end of the podcast. I always appreciate it when my listeners get to this point of the show. We've obviously inspired you to keep listening. So please do subscribe to keep updated on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Please tell your friends, please tell your colleagues, please share the love and the links. I have a number of other exciting guests lined up that I'm sure you'll be equally inspired by over the next few weeks, months, and maybe even years. And remember, if you'd love to be a guest, I'd love to have you on. And I also welcome any feedback and suggestions. So please contact me at joe.lockwood@tjchapman.co.uk, joe.lockwood@tjchapman.co.uk. And finally, my name is Joanne Lockwood. It has been an absolute pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Catch you next time. Bye.